For our last beef evaluation video, I wanted to go over some general beef judging rules when placing beef carcasses. I also wanted to give you guys some tips and tricks on how to fill out your note card, as well as some abbreviations for terms that you can use while filling out that note card. I also wanted to show you what I've put together as far as the beef grading rails and how you can actually utilize these tools, print them out, and practice them on your own. Beef carcass judging. We already discussed how USDA grading segments beef carcasses into one of 8 quality grades and into one of the 5 cutability grades. When we are evaluating beef carcasses in a beef judging class, we always want to rank the beef carcasses in order of value. The value is determined on quality and yield grades. There's a balance between the two. However, we like to put a larger emphasis, about 60% of the emphasis on placing carcasses on quality grade, whereas 40% is yield grade. So the rule of thumb is we always want to place beef carcasses on quality first, unless they are very low yielding. In a class, generally prime carcasses, if there's a prime carcass in the class, that's always going to rank first, unless that prime carcass is a yield grade 4 or a yield grade 5. Top choice carcasses are always going to rank over low choice carcasses or any lower quality grade. So top choice will always rank over low choice and also select grades. We're always going to rank beef carcasses from highest quality to lowest quality. There is an exception to this rule if there is a yield and a half grade difference between a select and a low choice grade, then that select grade can be placed over the low choice, but it has to be a yield and a half grade or greater than a yield and a half grade difference. So if you had a yield grade 3.5 low choice and a yield grade 2 select, then that is the only chance that you can actually place a select carcass over that low choice carcass, is if there's a yield and a half grade difference or greater than that. Carcasses of the same quality grade will always rank on yield grade. So if you find carcasses that are both in the low choice grade, it doesn't matter the difference between their marbling score, those carcasses will then be ranked on their final yield grade. In a carcass class, usually there is some sort of logic where it's put together that there is a carcass that goes last, and some carcasses really jump out and they go last in a hurry. USDA standard carcasses will always go last. So we talked in the quality grading video that there are very few USDA standards in the cattle population today. However, USDA standard cattle are such low quality that it doesn't matter regardless of how great their yield grade potentially could be. They could be a yield grade 1.0. Doesn't matter that their yield grade is so great, their quality is so poor that USDA standard carcasses are always going to go last. Carcasses that are yield grade 4s or 5s will also go last. Even though some of these carcasses may be potentially very high quality, their yield offsets the value of their quality grade. So we're going to be spending so much time trimming away all of the excess fat on the outer surface of the carcass, plus all of that fat is going to end up in rendering and it's not going to have any value. So yield grade 4 and 5 carcasses are always going to go last in a beef carcass class. If there's any chance in a class that there is a hard bone, so a carcass class that has a C, D, or E maturity, that is an advanced maturity carcass, and that carcass is going to go last regardless of its marbling score or yield grade. Any class that has a dark cutter presented, if there is a beef carcass that looks very dark purple or it's dark cutter, that carcass will also go last. So here I have 2 examples. We have 2 beef cattle. We have one heifer on the left, and that is going to be the black heifer. We have a red shorthorn appearing steer on the right. They are a little bit different in weight, little different type of cattle. Number 1 is a really softer made, larger framed, light muscled heifer, whereas number 2 is a little leaner, little heavier muscled, a little shorter frame, so that's why we have a smaller live weight. When we dress these carcasses out, you can definitely see that there is a difference between these two cattle. We see heifer number 1, as she's dressed out, that she is extremely fat. Not only evidenced by her PYG, which PYG probe, she sticks 4.7 on her back fat thickness, so that is over an inch of back fat. She has lots of fat. You can also see she has a ton of fat built up over her round, a ton of fat built up over her tail head, her sirloin. She pretty much has love handles out here on the side. There's tons of fat here. She's dripping fat over her chuck, along her brisket, and there is tons of kidney, pelvic, and heart fat, and we can see that evidenced by her 4% kph. However, she isn't fairly light muscled. She does have a pretty adequate ribeye. We have a 14.7 inch ribeye. She dressed out to be 136 pounds. So her final yield grade would be a yield grade 4. When evaluating her maturity, there is a little bit of ossification present in these thoracic buttons. It's very small. In person, it looked a lot more evident, and she actually graded out to be a B10, so very low, but she still has really great color, and that color kind of brings her back into the A maturity grade. Her marbling score is actually pretty good. She is a modest 20. This ribeye has a modest amount of marbling, so balancing out with her marbling and her maturity, she is going to be a final quality grade of an average choice. So this carcass, even with this fairly good sized ribeye and a top choice carcass, because of her yield grade, the value of this carcass would be approximately $175 per hundredweight. When we compare number 1, the black heifer, to the shorthorn steer, we can see a complete change and a big difference. So when you look at number 2, we can definitely tell that number 2 is obviously leaner and has a lot less fat than number 1. You can see the trimness as evidenced by all of this bluing that we see over the round. We call this bluing, where we can actually see the lean popping through the fat. We can actually see there's some hip shape there over that sirloin. You can see there's a dip where the muscle is meeting into the loin. So this animal is very lean, and that's also evidenced by the PYG. So opposite the ribeye, that back fat thickness stuck only a 2.8. This carcass has a slightly smaller ribeye, not that big of a difference, 14.4 versus 14.7. That's virtually equal in their ribeye size. The kph, this carcass has about 3% kph, so it still has quite a bit of kph in comparison to the average. And this final yield grade is going to be a 2.3. So we have a 2.3 carcass, really trim, pretty good in its muscling versus extremely fat and good in its muscling. So when we're looking at maturity, we can see this carcass is really brilliantly white within those thoracic buttons. Evaluation of all the skeletal brought this carcass of a maturity of A40. Its marbling score is a little bit less than our number 1 carcass. It graded out to be a small 80, so that is still going to be low choice. So in this carcass, we have a low choice yield grade 2 versus a top choice or average choice yield grade 4. So let's look at the value between these two carcasses, and that will also help solidify that ranking. A low choice yield grade 2 carcass will come out to be $183 per hundredweight. So this carcass has more value per pound than the carcass number 1, because per pound, number one, we have to trim away a lot of that fat, and that fat is going to be thrown away and not sold in the retail case. So it's really evident of why yield grade 4 and 5 carcasses are going to rank lower than yield grade 2. Even though yield grade 2, the quality grade isn't as good as number 1, the yield grade in this instance is going to rank 2 over 1. So if you break them down and look at them as cuts, we have all the cuts back here on the table for number 1, all of the cuts, wholesale cuts back here for number 2. We have our bags of lean trimmings here. Here's the bags of lean trimmings. And then we can see the bags of fat. Looks like on number 1, there's 1, 2, 3 bags of fat. We have 25.2% of this carcass weight is actually going to be fat. So 25% of its carcass weight is going to be thrown away. And that is a significant amount. Versus number 2, we had 15.5% of that carcass weight was actually fat. So not as much fat that we're going to throw away. So the value you can see here in the pictures. So if you were evaluating this pair in a contest, I've set up a note card for you. Place 2 over 1 due to superior trimness. There's a superior trimness advantage where carcass number 2 would result in a higher percentage of closely trimmed retail cuts from the round, loin, rib, and chuck. So number 2 had significantly less fat opposite the ribeye. So here I even underline in bold opposite the ribeye. There's significant less fat opposite the ribeye, much less fat over the lower rib, round, sirloin, huge difference over the sirloin, huge difference over the loin edge, loin, rib, and chuck, with obviously less cod versus udder fat since we're comparing a steer versus a heifer. Less fat over the brisket and less kidney, pelvic, and heart fat percentage. Number 2 also possessed a heavier muscle, plumper cushion round with a meatier heel and a shorter shank. So those are the reasons why 2 beats 1. Well, we also want to say some things, if they are possible, of why 1 grants back over 2. We do want to recognize that 1 was higher quality. So 1 had a higher degree of marbling in the ribeye. 1 was average choice. However, even though number 1 was average choice, it wasn't suitable for a top choice box beef program because it graded yield grade 4, and so it eliminated it from that program. So we are going to grant back that number 1 had a higher degree of marbling and a brighter, more cherry red colored lean in the ribeye. So I understand that this note card is written as a format for a set of reasons, but reading this note card, you can picture in your mind what those carcasses actually look like.